Hello, my friends. This is Beyond Range Equilibrium, episode 001. I want to start at the very beginning, before any chart, before any formula, before any frequency, with a single shift in how you see what is happening when two people sit across from each other at a heads-up table. Because if this shift does not lock in for you, nothing else in the next 40 hours of these talks is going to land the way it could. And if it does lock in, every other concept we are going to walk through, every piece of math, every ratio, every range, every bet size, every counter move will fall into a single coherent picture in your mind, and you will start to play slowly over months as if a tree had been calculated inside you without the calculation ever being conscious. That is the destination. The shift is the door. And tonight, this evening, in this first long talk, we are going to walk together up to the door, and we are going to open it, and we are going to step through. Here is the shift, said as plainly as I can say it. Poker is not a card game. It looks like one. The cards are right there on the felt, with their friendly little painted numbers and suits, and so it is natural, almost irresistible, to think that the game is happening at the level of the cards. It is not. The cards are the surface of the game itself, the real game, the one that is actually being played whether the people at the table know it or not, is happening one layer below the cards, in the strange invisible space where two strategies are colliding with each other, where each decision changes the meaning of every other decision, where the chips move not because of what you have, but because of the entire pattern of choices that produce this exact moment. The cards are the props, the strategies are the play, and until you make this shift deep in your bones, you are playing a different and shallower game than the people who have made it, and you are going to lose to them in the long run, no matter how lucky your cards happen to be tonight. Let me put it another way, because this is the most important thing I am going to say in this whole talk, and I want to make sure it lands more than once. Imagine two people sitting across from each other playing chess. The pieces are sitting there on the board. The pawns and knights and bishops are real pieces of wood, and you could pick one up and hold it in your hand and feel the weight of it. But nobody watching that game says those two people are playing pieces of wood. They are playing chess. The wood is the medium through which a much deeper game is being played. A game of position, of pressure, of plan, and the wood is only the visible local form of that deeper game. Now imagine the same two people had never been told the deeper game existed and were just shoving the pieces of wood around the board hoping for good outcomes, with no concept of position, no concept of threat, no concept of long planning. They would, in some sense, be playing a completely different game from the one a grandmaster plays, even though they are sitting at the same board, using the same pieces, moving them according to the same rules. That is the situation of the poker player who has not made the shift I am about to ask you to make. He is shoving cards around. The real game is happening on a level above him, and he cannot see it, and he is losing to people who can. The deeper game in poker is the geometry of strategy, and I want to define what a strategy actually is, technically and carefully, because most people who use the word do not really know what it means, and the loose use of the word is part of what keeps the shift from happening. A strategy, in the technical sense we are going to keep coming back to in every single one of these episodes, is a complete plan for what you do at every possible moment of the game, with every possible holding you could be dealt, given every possible history of action that has led you to this moment. That is a mouthful, so let me unpack it slowly. A strategy is not a single decision. A strategy is not what you decide to do in this hand. A strategy is the whole of how you would play if you were a function, if you were a kind of decision machine that took in a situation and gave out an action. Every possible situation, every possible holding, every possible history. the complete map of how you would respond to every position you could find yourself in over the course of an infinite number of hands. That is your strategy. And it exists in some form, whether you have ever written it down or not, because every time you sit down to play, you are running it. The way a piece of software runs a program, and the outputs are your actions, hand after hand, decision after decision, for as long as you sit in the chair. Now, most players have a strategy they have never written down, never examined, never explicitly chosen, and so they think they are making decisions hand by hand, freshly, in the moment, when really they are running a pattern they put in place years ago and have been quietly executing ever since, with small variations in every spot they have faced. The pattern is the strategy is the player, and the question, the only real question of theoretical poker, the question that organizes everything else, is whether the strategy you are running is a good one, by which I mean whether against the strategy your opponent is running, your strategy produces more money than money lost over a long enough run that the noise of variance has been averaged out. That is the only question that matters at the level of theory. Everything else, every concept we are going to walk through in this whole series, is a tool for answering that one question more precisely than you could answer it before. And here is where the math comes into the room, gently for now, because the math is going to come in much harder later, and I want to introduce it to you like a friend rather than ambush you with it. Once you start thinking in strategies rather than hands, you can start asking the question, what is the best strategy? And the moment you ask that question, you have walked into the room where game theory lives, because game theory is, in its essence, the mathematics of finding the best strategy when the best strategy depends on what the other person is doing. That dependency is the strange and fascinating thing about poker, the thing that makes it deeper than a game like roulette, because in roulette, the wheel does not care what you do, and so finding the best strategy against the wheel is trivial. You just bet according to the odds and accept your fate. But in poker, the other player is also choosing a strategy, and her choice is shaped by what she thinks your choice is, and yours is shaped by what you think hers is, and the whole thing curls in on itself like a pair of mirrors facing each other, and out of that curl, that infinite recursion of two minds modeling each other, modeling each other, modeling each other, emerges the whole structure of what we are going to spend the next 40 episodes exploring. I want to slow down right there on the mirrors because that image is going to come back many times in this series, and I want you to hold it. Two mirrors facing each other. Each one shows the other one. Each one shows itself showing the other one. Each one shows the other one, showing the self showing the other one. Forever. That is what is happening in the space between two minds at a poker table. You are not just deciding what to do, you are deciding what to do given what she will do, given what she thinks you will do, given what you think she thinks you will do, and the regress in principle has no end. The miracle of game theory, the thing that makes the whole math possible at all, is that the regress, infinite as it is, has a kind of fixed point, a place where the recursion stops chasing its own tail, where your best response to her strategy is her strategy's best response to yours, and the two of you settle into a stable pair where neither one can do better by changing unilaterally. That fixed point has a name. The name is Nash equilibrium, and the rest of this series is in some way an extended walk around that one strange and beautiful concept and its consequences. There is a man named John von Neumann who looked at this problem of two-player games in the 1920s and 1930s and who did something remarkable. He proved mathematically that for a very large class of games, which includes poker, there exists a kind of solution. A pair of strategies, one for each player, such that neither player can do better by changing his strategy unilaterally, given that the other player is playing her half of the pair. He proved it cleanly with the full force of mathematics behind it, and the proof, while it is not the kind of thing I am going to walk you through line by line because that is a different kind of book, is one of the most beautiful results in 20th century mathematics, and it is the foundation underneath everything I am going to say to you for the rest of this course. John Nash, a generation later, generalized von Neumann's results to a wider class of situations: multiplayer games, non-zero sum games. The whole landscape and the modern field of game theory is built on top of their two minds and the work of a few others who came in their wake. What it means in poker terms, what we will keep coming back to, is that there is a way to play that is technically defined and mathematically describable, against which your opponent cannot do better than break even with you, no matter what she tries. That way to play is what we are going to call equilibrium, or balanced play, or in the slang of the modern community, GTO. It is the ground state of the game. It is the place from which all other strategic discussions ultimately make sense. I want to stress two things about this ground state before we go any further, because almost everybody who learns about it gets at least one of them wrong, and the misunderstanding costs them real money. The first thing is that equilibrium is not the same as best play. Equilibrium is the play that is unexploitable, that cannot be beaten by any specific opponent's specific strategy. But against any particular opponent who is making particular mistakes, the play that maximizes your expectation is almost certainly not equilibrium. It is some deviation from equilibrium that exploits the mistakes the opponent is actually making. So equilibrium is a defensive concept, a floor under your win rate, a guarantee that you cannot be exploited. It is not the ceiling. The ceiling is exploitation, which we will spend a long time on in the back half of this series, and which requires equilibrium as its starting point, but then deliberately walks away from it whenever there is reason to. Equilibrium is the home base. Exploitation is the journey out from home base when home base is no longer the most profitable place to stand. Almost every player I have ever met who has tried to install GTO directly into his game has done it as if equilibrium were the goal, and the cost of that misunderstanding is enormous because you have spent years building a defensive instrument when what you actually wanted was an offensive one. The defensive instrument is necessary, it is the foundation, but it is not the building. We are going to build the building on top of it. The second thing is that equilibrium, in the abstract, is not a single strategy but a description of a property a pair of strategies has. There can be many pairs of strategies that have this property, and which one you end up in depends on small details, on history, on convention. Most of the time in poker, we talk as if there is one equilibrium strategy, and for most practical purposes, this is fine because the strategies that the solvers spit out tend to be close enough to each other that the differences do not matter much in the way they actually get played. But it is worth knowing, somewhere in the back of your head, that the math does not pick a unique answer. The math picks a family of answers, and the family is itself a strange and beautiful object that you can spend years thinking about and not exhaust. There are equilibria where you bet small and bluff often, and equilibria where you bet big and bluff rarely, and both can be unexploitable, and the choice between them is sometimes a matter of which convention the community has settled on, rather than which one is mathematically forced. Hold that lightly, it will come up later. Let me make this concrete now, because I promised myself at the start of this series that I would not let any episode stay too abstract, and I want to put one specific spot in front of you so you can feel the difference between hand thinking and strategy thinking. You are on the button. The blinds have been folded, and your opponent is the big blind. You look down and you see ace-king offsuit. Now, the hand thinker's question is, what should I do with ace king? He consults some internal table. Maybe he has heard somewhere that you should 3-bet with ace king. Maybe he likes to open with it. Maybe he likes to limp it sometimes for deception. He picks an action based on what feels right for the hand. But the strategy thinker asks a completely different question. He asks, what should my whole button opening range look like in this matchup? What should be the size and frequency of my opens? What hand should I open and which should I fold? And given the whole shape of my opening range and how it interacts with her defending range, where does ace-king sit? And the answer might be that ace-king is one of the strongest hands in his opening range, and so it gets opened with the same standard size that most of his range gets opened with, not because ace-king specifically needs a particular sizing, but because his whole range is opening with that sizing, and ace-king is just one hand inside that hole. Or the answer might be that he is using a mixed strategy with ace-king, opening it most of the time but sometimes limping or 3-betting depending on a randomization, because the optimal frequency for taking each of those actions across his whole range happens to place ace-king on a boundary where multiple actions are correct. Notice what just happened. The hand thinker's question and the strategy thinker's question produce the same physical action and open on the button, but the reasoning was completely different, and the reasoning matters because next time the hand thinker faces a slightly different situation, ace-king under the gun, ace-king facing a 3-bet, ace-king on a particular flop, his reasoning gives him no traction because it was reasoning about ace-king specifically and not about how ace-king fits into a range. The strategy thinker's reasoning, on the other hand, generalizes because the question he was asking, what does my range do here and where does this hand sit in my range, is a question that applies to every situation, with every hand, on every street, in every matchup. He has been given a tool. The hand thinker has been given an answer. The tool keeps working forever. The answer only works once, and the difference is not academic. It compounds. Across 1,000 spots, the strategy thinker gets 1,000 correct answers from his one tool, and the hand thinker has to keep guessing every time he runs into a slightly new situation, and his guesses are good when his memory is fresh and his teacher was good and his attention is sharp, and his guesses are bad when any of those things slip, which is often because life is long and we forget and we get tired. The strategy thinker is robust, the hand thinker is fragile, and the robustness is the difference between someone who can keep climbing through the stakes for a decade and someone who plateaus at his current level and never quite figures out why. Now, doubling back because I want to be honest about the limits of what I am telling you, the shift from hand thinking to strategy thinking is not a clean magic break that fixes everything. Even the most strategy-trained player, when the cards turn over and he holds a specific hand in his actual hands and has to act with that specific hand right now, has to come back to the specific, because the action gets taken with a specific hand against a specific opponent in a specific moment. The strategy thinker does not abolish the specific, he frames the specific. He uses strategy thinking to set up the question, and then he uses the specifics of the moment to refine the answer, and the two ways of thinking come back together at the moment of action, with the strategy doing the load-bearing work and the specifics adjusting at the margins. So I do not want to oversell the shift as if it eliminates everything that came before. It does not. It puts everything that came before into a new and bigger frame in which the old hand-based intuitions become inputs to the new strategy-based reasoning rather than the whole of it. There is also a personal cost to this shift, one nobody mentions in the technical books, and I want to put it in front of you because I think it is part of what makes the shift hard. When you start thinking in strategies, you stop being able to enjoy the game in the simple, ego bound way that hand thinkers enjoy it. The hand thinker, when he wins, feels he played his hand well. When he loses, he feels he was unlucky. The strategy thinker has lost access to both of those simple feelings because he knows in his bones that the hand was just one node in a larger pattern, and the pattern was the right pattern, and whether this specific node delivered chips to him or to her is mostly a function of the cards, which is to say of randomness, which is to say of nothing he or she can take credit or blame for. The hand thinker has a hero's life. He wins, he is the hero. He loses, he is the victim. The strategy thinker has in some way given up both roles because he sees too clearly that he is neither hero nor victim, he is just the executor of a pattern, and the pattern is what matters, and the pattern can be right or wrong, but his ego cannot really attach to any single outcome the pattern produces. That is a kind of small spiritual loss for which the strategy thinker is compensated by an actual increase in his win rate, but it is a real loss, and I want to acknowledge it because the players I know who refuse the shift are not all refusing it because they are stupid. Some of them are refusing it because the shift takes away something they liked about the game, and they would rather keep the thing they liked and lose money than have a higher win rate inside a relationship to the game that feels colder and stranger and less personally heroic. That is, in its way, a legitimate choice. I have made it for years myself in cycles and come back to the shift and slipped away from it and come back again. So if you find yourself resisting all of this, even after you intellectually agree, that is part of why, and it is worth knowing. Let me name what I am rebelling against here briefly because I am always rebelling against something and you should know what it is. The poker world has, in the last decade, produced a strange kind of player. The player who has memorized solver outputs without understanding them, who can quote ranges and frequencies in his sleep, but cannot tell you why, who has installed the surface of strategy thinking without making the deep shift I am trying to describe. He looks on the surface like a strategy thinker. He uses all the right vocabulary. He talks about ranges and EV and indifference, but underneath he is still hand thinking, just with a more impressive set of facts about each specific hand, and when you press him on the why of any specific frequency, he does not know he has just memorized. That player is the dominant product of the modern training site economy. He is more dangerous than the old style hand thinker because he has been weaponized against his own actual understanding, sold a vocabulary instead of a shift, and he is paying real money to maintain the illusion. The whole industry of training sites, GTO charts, solver subscriptions, has in many of its branches become a machine for producing this player who has memorized the surface of strategy thinking without ever making the deep move underneath. I am not saying these tools are useless, they are not. I am saying that the tools without the shift produce a more articulate version of the same shallow game, and the shift without the tools is still a deeper game than the tools without the shift. And if I had to pick which to spend my time on, I would pick the shift every time with no hesitation. The tools are downstream of the understanding. The understanding is the work. Let me confess my part in this, because if I let myself stand above the disease I am criticizing, I will be exactly what I am warning you about. I have spent years memorizing things I did not really understand. I have quoted frequencies I could not have derived. I have nodded along to solver outputs without sitting long enough with the question of why. The talk you are listening to is partly the sound of me trying to do finally the work I should have done from the start, which is to make sure the shift actually happened in me before I started to act as if it had. I am inside the disease. The series is partly my own rehabilitation, which I am inviting you to share. Take whatever is useful, throw out the rest, and do not for a second mistake me for a man who has finished the climb, because I have not, and the climb is the thing. And I might be wrong about all of this. There is a real chance I am over philosophizing what is, at the end of the day, just a game with cards and chips, and that the players who never make this shift but who play with good intuition and a calm body do just as well as the ones who carry around a complete game theoretic worldview. Test it yourself, sit with it, run the experiment in your own play across an honest stretch of time. The whole point of this series is that you do not have to believe me on any of it, you just have to be willing to try the lens and see whether the world looks different through it, and if it does not, you should put the lens down and find a different one. I am offering you a way of seeing. The test of any way of seeing is whether what you see through it is more useful, more honest, more accurate than what you saw before. That test is yours to run, not mine. Here is what I would have you actually do this week, woven together, because none of this lands until you have it in your body. The first thing is, next time you face a real decision at the table, before you decide what to do with your specific hand, force yourself to ask the strategy question first. What should my whole range do here? What fraction bet? What fraction check? What fraction call? What fraction fold? And only after you have answered that, ask where your specific hand sits in that distribution. The act of doing this once, slowly mid-hand, will rewire something in you, and you will start to notice the question feels bigger and more important than the question of what to do with your hand. The second thing is, when you study a hand history after a session, do not study the specific hand. Study the spot. Ask what should anyone do in this spot with this whole range, and only then ask where your specific hand sat. The third thing is, when you lose a big pot, refuse this week to ask whether you played the hand well in isolation. Ask instead whether the line you took was the right line for your whole range. The hand is one sample of the line. The line is the unit of judgment. The fourth thing is, when you watch other players, especially good ones, try to back out what their range must look like from their actions rather than what their hand probably is. The shift will start to feel natural once you have tried to size up other people through the range lens, because the lens, once on, fits the data better than the hand lens ever did. And the fifth thing, the one that ties it all together, is to give yourself permission this week to lose specific hands, to lose specific sessions, to watch yourself lose without making it personal, because the strategy thinker has to be willing to lose individual hands inside a winning long-run pattern, and the willingness to lose is part of the cost of admission to the deeper game. The hand thinker cannot afford to lose any one hand emotionally. The strategy thinker is too busy looking at the pattern to care about any one node. That willingness is its own small spiritual practice, and it is the soil out of which the whole shift grows. Next time we are going to take the second step, which is the one that actually puts the strategy shift into a usable form, because saying think in strategies is a kind of slogan, and the question of how you actually do that in real time with real cards against real opponents is a question we have not yet touched. The answer is range thinking, which is the technical move that makes strategy thinking practical. We are going to spend a full episode on the shift from hands to ranges, on what a range actually is, on how to think about your own range and your opponent's range, on the way the whole game starts to look different once you have replaced the question, what does he have, with the question, what does his range look like in this spot? Same shift, bigger frame, sharper tools. Take care of yourselves. I will see you on the next one. I love you.